Welcome. I'm here to talk about the psychology of an image maker, of being an image maker, and the psychology of an image. When I was asked to speak at Adorama, my initial reaction was kind of this rush of joy and excitement, and then it was quickly replaced with fear and kind of horror. I kept thinking, this is amazing, followed up with, what the hell, why me? Sorry. I'm still in the middle of my career, I haven't made it, all that stuff. After some more loathing and bewilderment, I realized that this question of being enough and the worry of not feeling worthy on a test or at a meeting, and the idea of what it means to be successful is actually quite symbolic of a larger issue of what many photographers go through. And so while Adorama is an equipment store and a source of tangible knowledge with people with technical prowess, I thought I would talk about the intangible and the non-technical. I wanted to share what isn't always talked about, those in-between moments when you're alone in your studio or on set and you have a moment of, am I enough? So instead of fearing my vulnerability and fearing that I would be ridiculed for not being ready, I'm not only embracing it, but I would like to share it with you guys. Because this business of photography and of being an artist can be very lonely and at times a maddening profession. Not only is it technical, it's creative. It's about understanding and seeing light, and knowing how to manipulate it to produce the desired outcome. Being thrown in a myriad of situations that we have to navigate our way around, or people that we don't know, we always are in this state of business and art. It's about using your left and your right brain at the same time to translate it into unique style. It's about marketing your soul to the world and trying to stand strong against the gusty storms of rejection. So I wanted to share the quiet moments of vulnerability with you and actually how that came to be a part of my style. And I hope to leave you today with a sense of empowerment by allowing you to see that my work is a work in progress and reflect on where you are as a photographer and where you hope to go. I wanted to share my struggles with you and not just be about a finished product, but rather tap into that gray area that a lot of people are uncomfortable to talk about. Through my story and my process, I hope to be the change or some inspiration for you. Sometimes it's just about getting out of your head and into your camera. I picked up photography at a leisurely pace. That is to say, with no real intention of becoming one. I was more of a wanderer, someone who was on the quest for adventure and knowledge. I wanted to investigate, to smell, to read, to taste and touch everything. My name Keziban means keeper of time in Old Turkish, and in many ways I think my name has taken on its own character in my life, both metaphorically and literally. I had the fortune of traveling quite a bit as a child since my parents were teachers and also inquirers of the world. With my older siblings, the five of us were bound together in this desire to become explorers of wit, consumers of knowledge, creators of language, and become the best storytellers. When I was younger, I realized that despite my sunny disposition, I had an old soul where melancholy was my ghostly twin sister. Even though I'm not Jewish, the visuals of the Holocaust Memorial in Boston really resonated with me, and I decided to photograph it for my final 8th grade project. I wish I could find those prints to show you, but they were lost before there was digital cataloging. All I remember is that the black and white prints of these glass towers that had all the numbers of the victims from the Holocaust on it. I captured the smoke that was billowing up through the towers, filling it with metaphors. A representative of our local museum saw my prints and they wound up being showcased in their larger story of Boston. It was pretty cool, but it still didn't convince me to become a photographer. I went on to continue traveling in high school and taking photos loosely on the side. But it wasn't until college that it came back through my life through a series of awkward transitions and ignorant blunders. Photography really started as a way to capture all my travels. I had caught the travel bug and sought out all these different opportunities to venture off to other lands. When you are younger, you are cocky in a way that is born out of ignorance. I sometimes look back at these opportunities and think, why aren't I doing this now? Well, I suppose it's because the more you know, the more you realize how much you don't know. While studying Shakespeare at Georgetown, I convinced National Geographic Traveler to take me on as their first photo editor intern. I was with them for a semester and then marched off to my second time living in Spain, I'll get more into that later, and did a life-altering workshop with Magnum photographer Alex Majoli. Magnum Photography, if you don't know it, is a renowned group of photographers that blow my mind. He was like a military drill sergeant. and in a mixture of Spanish, English, and Italian, he would bark and scoff at every single photo of mine. Except one. It was this rack shot through a fence of a boy playing on the ground. I didn't understand what a rack shot was at the time, and I didn't understand why he liked it, but he made me explain it until I was blue in the face. I eventually stumbled upon the reason. He used to bandage my zoom lens so that if I wanted a closer shot, I'd have to go up and get it. And it was in getting closer where my addiction to photography was born. It wasn't just about getting physically closer, but it was about getting mentally closer to whoever or whomever, to whatever or whomever you're photographing. It was in sharing that intimate space that was beautifully enslaving to me. And it was the start of a beautiful love story. These are just some self-portrait images that I had up to kind of go along with the talk. And then we'll get into more of my images later. After college, I was brought on to direct a student documentary in Costa Rica. Once again, in my ignorant confidence, I managed to convince a producer who I'd worked with previously that I had the skill to conduct all the interviews in Spanish and direct this documentary. Despite the producer having a major meltdown at the end of the production, I somehow survived and had a 30-minute documentary. It was pretty cool. Shortly after returning stateside, I moved to New York and then ended up getting hired at National Geographic Adventure magazine as the assistant photo editor. You know, when you're surrounded by that many talented people and that many talented visionaries of the National Geographic exploratory world, you come to understand what makes a good photo really quick. I never went to photography school, but I did study with the masters while working there. It was a powerful couple of years where I'm still humbled by the wisdoms that these visionaries bestowed upon me. But I noticed that over time, what slowly started to happen is that I wanted to be the one creating the images, not just reviewing them. I would get hundreds of submissions, often of things the magazine would never run due to its content. But those images stayed with me as possibilities of what could be. I was inspired by the greater stories surrounding those reportage images. I thought of scenes that could stem from these very real and sometimes very harrowing stories. It was this inspiration of mankind, the trials and tribulations of what it means to be human in all sorts of different environments. These stories and images left me wanting, and I longed to be on the other side. I had been dancing around the reportage world for quite some time, but I realized my real desires came in the form of creating the image instead of being a fly on the wall. I loved to adventure and to travel and to photograph, but preferred creating a story using fashion as a character and location as a narrative. Fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, the opportunity presented itself through the guise of failure. National Geographic Adventure magazine folded in 2009 after the economy crashed, and suddenly I was left without a job. At least they prepared me with how to survive almost anything. After the initial shock wore off, I realized, like everything else in my life, I could turn this mishap into an opportunity. I finally had the chance to become a photographer. It's certainly a more rugged path, and being a freelance photographer is not for everybody. But like everything else in life that ended up being a successful mistake, I dove in head first. I took all of my travels, everything I had learned in college, all my understandings of history and language, of storytelling, and everything I had learned at National Geographic, and I took all of this as fuel and jumped in this photographic abyss. Years ago, I had come across this Japanese proverb that sort of sums up my career. Jump first and build your wings as you learn how to fly. So now here is where psychology really comes in, because at this point I'm in this free fall with the coyote from Roadrunner, and I've got to do something, otherwise I'm going to drop real fast. Well, like anything, practice makes perfect. This image, a little backstory, when I first started shooting, I grabbed my friend who happened to be a hair and makeup stylist, and I started doing a small series on her. And she was, this photo ended up being chosen in a group show curated by Arbus. I don't know if any of you know her. She's the daughter of Diane Arbus, who is a pretty well-known and interesting photographer. I recommend you looking up her work. They are both extremely talented in their own way. But it was in this photo where I discovered that my pull is more towards a cinematic endeavor. I liked this sense of capturing a moment where something is about to happen, that split second right before everything changes. I realized I love the cinematic just before or just after, this mise en scene of a momentous action where both subjects and spectators experience the anxiety that awaits an imminent fate or confront the tragic result of a seemingly inescapable reality. So instead of the goal of the shoot being just the clothes or just the makeup or just a product, I really wanted to focus on the psychology of the image and what's happening. It's about creating a mood that transcends time and evokes an emotional response. Yes, lighting, props, and angles all definitely play into this, but what makes this photo work, at least in my mind, is that her expression leaves you wanting more. You almost become an intruder to the scene, and the normal sense of quiet observation vanishes, and you become a character as well, watching part of the scene unfold. I'm also quite a literal person, and so this fear I had of being an artist was sort of manifested through my work. Fear became a character, and I used what could be considered a weakness as a strength. These images were from a fashion campaign that I shot for the designer Victor de Souza. What I find interesting is that most of these images that were selects were actually outtakes. That is to say, they were these in-between moments I shot primarily for myself that ended up being used. I think it's because they pull in the character, the viewer, into their world and make you wonder what's happening. The sense of being vulnerable, of being stuck in a visual nightmare as a reality. So it was this couple layers of fear, both fear as a main character channeled through the fear of being a photographer or failure of not being good enough. It manifested in my work and then became the subject matter. And it was almost a catharsis where I would release the fear of taking the photo into the photo, and it would take it away from me. And this kind of leads me to talk about fear as being an artist in general. It's really scary to do this. And you know, you think to become a photographer, you're going to be successful, and we look around us, and there's, I don't know how many photographers this day and age. So it's so important to have a voice, and it's so important to have your own voice. And the good news about this is that it's your own voice, and you don't have to go find it from anywhere else. The bad news is that you have to figure out yourself as well. There are a few good books on art and fear, and one of them happens to be by a very well-known artist by the name of Van Gogh. He was a painter in the 19th century, but had captured the essence of what it means to be a photographer in the 21st century. And he says, so what do you want? Does what happens inside show on the outside? There is such a great fire in one's soul, and yet nobody ever comes to warm themselves there. And passerbyers see nothing but a little smoke coming from the top of the chimney and go on their way. Vincent van Gogh, July 1880. We often think of our struggles are isolated as photographers, that we live alone in self-reproach while everyone else is having fun and making money and swimming in clients. But these anxieties, these fears, and financial struggles are definitely not unique to you. As I mentioned earlier, we all share a similar story. It's just that most people don't talk about it. But let's be honest, being a photographer is mostly about trial and error. You don't get it right in the first photo, and you're probably not really considered an amateur until you've at least taken 10,000 photos. But we all start with something that's restless inside of us, and it frustrates us that we can't get it out. This is a photo I took that I thought kind of represented this frustration of trying to get it out. And again, his quote is, there are different kinds of idlers. There's the man who's idle from laziness and lack of character. Then there's the other kind of idler, who is idle despite himself, who's consumed inwardly by a great desire for action, but who does nothing, because it is impossible to do anything, because it is as if he were imprisoned in some way, because he lacks what he needs to be productive, because inevitable circumstances have reduced him to this. Another shot showcasing for this. Our frustration as aspiring artists tends to lead to inaction, which is the worst thing possible. When we don't know what to do or where to go or how to get there, we tend to stay in the same spot. And we also usually blame our circumstances for this, for our inaction. We never had enough time, we don't have enough money, we never have the right gear, we don't have a studio. We know inside that we could be great, or perhaps at least as good as the guy down the road, but we just don't know how. It's actually quite simple. The only way to get out of a creative or business or personal slump is actually to get to work. There's this phrase that I've come to sort of live by, which is be, do, have. Oh, this is another picture I took to represent kind of being stuck. There's this phrase I've come to abide by that is called be, do, have. If I want to be a successful photographer, i.e. making money and living off of my art, then I need to act like a successful photographer. Introspection is good, but you don't become successful by sitting in a dark room looking inward. You have to get to work. You have to be the photographer you want to be, and then you have to do the work. No way you're going to be successful by wondering. And only in doing will you be able to have a breakthrough. Mastery only comes with practice, and unfortunately no one else can do it for you. And only then will you have the success you are seeking. In a total side note, Van Gogh's career lasted about a decade, and in that time he turned over about 2,000 works of art, which boils down to about 4 pieces a week. And if you think about in 10 years, if you were shooting 4 times a week, like where would you be? It's kind of insane. And he quotes saying, "The factory is in full operation." And he kind of refers to his studio as a factory because it's true. You really, it's not all beauty, it's not all glamorous. A lot of these photos are the final selects after thousands of images. You have to work and you have to show up every day. Otherwise, you'll never make it. And just as a side tip, if nothing else, if you have no idea what to shoot or are not feeling inspired, try taking one object, anything, a lens, or not a lens, like a little toy or a plant or an apple, and shoot it 15 different ways. I guarantee you can do it. If you change your perspective, literally and physically, it will become alive and will tell a story through this perspective. I did this workshop with kids, and I gave them all these little Japanese erasers that were different animals and objects. And I had them with their iPhones write a scene, I had them write out a scene of what's happening with the object and had to use their iPhones to take pictures. And it was adorable what happened. They had all these different stories of, the horse and the cow and running up and drawings. And it gave these little inanimate objects a story and context and allowed for the kids to have a deeper connection, even though they were just erasers. It's about photographing something. I gave a couple different images of perspectives that I have. This could be shot a whole bunch of different ways, but this story, with the legs is a story. This girl hanging, completely different perspective. And this kind of an image, what does this say? What's about to happen? I want to talk a little bit about photography as therapy, because it actually can be pretty therapeutic. If you don't know how to shoot or what to shoot, then I suggest turning the lens on yourself and find a personal story. Find something that happened to you and really unpack it. Make it come alive, even if it's a little bit uncomfortable or unpleasant. A few years ago, I did a gun series, not because I like guns, but because I had a rather unpleasant encounter with one. I had been living in South Africa and had been jumped at gunpoint. It was a pretty intense experience, and it stayed with me for a long time. So I did this series called Girl Interrupted. It was my attempt at reconciling what happened to me by taking back a feeling of control and turning a negative experience into something that I could own and define in a different light. In no way am I trying to glorify or promote the use of guns. Rather, I'm using expression, texture, and abstract ideas to come to terms with its disturbing occurrence. This is one of my favorites. Because coming back to psychology, what's more important than just lights or the perfect angle is connecting with your subject. And that's what ultimately makes the photo. And I don't mean only when he or she is looking at you. I mean when your subject truly connects with you and understands the motivation behind the photo. When it becomes about creating something that never was or never could be without that connection and without that understanding, and it gives it such a beautiful context and it makes it come alive. My connection with my subjects largely stems from my cinematic inspirations. I always talk to my subjects and explain my story to them. I give them characters to think about or ask them questions like, how would you react if a stranger slapped you? Or what expression would you make if a rat skittered across your feet or if a bat was flying around your head? or if you saw your boyfriend cheating on you. Maybe a bit random or dramatic an example, but I'm trying to pull out a thought process, whether that's with myself or with my subjects. I get them to consider what it would be like to be somebody else and to draw upon something that could happen to them, using a framework to get them mentally positioned, because it's about storytelling that comes from real-world happenings and real-world connection. So I wanted to show you a few images where my mood, my connection with the model, and all the backstory come into play, and just kind of get your feedback as well. This was shot in South Africa at a car graveyard, where it was just kind of this pile of these old cars. And so I took my subject and I kind of gave her this story, and we worked there for a couple hours just back and forth. And I landed on this image because I felt it really showed this sort of, it's a bright day, clearly tons of sun, yet there's a girl, we don't know if she's dead or alive, just lying on the floor, and my intention was that it begets a question of what's happening or what just happened. This story, ironically, is shot in a very beautiful part of New York. It's in Bridgehampton, but I tend to like to find the ugliest things. So I found this decrepit gas station, and I grabbed some hair curlers, and I had her sitting there and just looking out. And I don't know, it just, for me, the way she's looking, it kind of pulls the viewer into the story and makes you kind of wonder, like, was she abandoned? Was she left? Like, what's happening? Sort of a quiet and calm calamity to it, I guess. This, I asked her to channel James Dean. I thought she's a very effeminate girl in this very effeminate shirt, but in this masculine sense, smoking and kind of this short hair. I thought it was fun. This was also in South Africa, actually. This story I love. It was a bit sad in that it was shot in District 6, which is this area in South Africa. I was just there a lot. That's why a lot of these images are from there. Recently I was there. And it was in District 6, which was during apartheid. All the people that had been living there were asked to move out. Not asked, were forced to move out so that other people could move in, presumably white. But nobody ended up moving in. So it was just these abandoned houses all over that kind of, I don't know, it was very dramatic and melancholic, but also beautiful at the same time. And so I kind of thought with the baby, it was almost like this ghost-like kind of operation, and the smoke's kind of coming up, and there's this landscape behind her. Or is she in the house or outside of the house? Sort of makes you wonder. This is another story I shot in Spain, where I just thought, even though she's not facing you and you have no idea what she's thinking, it sort of brings you in, because it's like this beautiful woman on this rooftop. Why is she there? How did she get up there? What is she looking at? What is she longing at? It's called añoranza, which in Spanish means yearning or longing. This was a bit artistic. I had this big white sheet. It was actually another image I have. And I kind of threw her up on this big ladder, and I ran down to the beach on the other side and kind of had her just moving around. It was this oddly dramatic day. There was like clouds, and it was sunny, and so it was kind of this perfect lineup of elements, so to say. And so it's almost as if she's going to take off in flight. I love that. And this, I thought was sort of same thing, just the sense of washing up on the shore, and the splash of water happened to come perfectly, and kind of where are they in this scene. And this as well is taken after these huge fires had just happened. So this is all completely ash and barren. And I had her just sort of, I directed her in a way of like, well, were you left there? Who are you in this? She's longingly looking out, who are you looking for? You can see a little bit of ocean right there. So the next part I just want to kind of go over is the pacing and kind of touch upon the psychology and pacing. And I'm sure you all have had experienced uncomfortable moments when you're shooting new clients. They don't know what to do or how to act, and it's really awkward, and they're fidgety, and then you become awkward, and it's just kind of gets messy for a second. Well, what I tend to do, and it's really helpful, and I guarantee you're probably not even doing it like you should right now, is actually just take a deep breath. It totally can help chill you out, chill out your client. It just kind of resets where you need to be. And it helps you kind of remind yourself that this is supposed to be fun, it's not supposed to be scary, you're not doing surgery, you're taking a photo. And it also kind of, I thought this photo kind of represented taking a deep breath. You know, breathing allows you to be present because you're focusing on what's there. And with photography, the more present you are, the better, because you realize you really are the source of everything you do. And if you're present in what you're doing, it creates more meaningful results. It's another image, just taking a moment. These are actually two sisters I photographed. So what do you want? This leads me to another aspect of image making. What do you want and why are you doing it? If you don't know why you're doing it, nobody's going to. You're going to be trying understanding who you are as a photographer for probably your whole life. It's this ongoing process and one we have to be mindful of every time we shoot. What is the purpose? When you take a picture, it's like you have to have something to say. If you're just taking pictures that you don't care about, I guarantee you nobody's going to care about them. It will show through your work. A photograph is a representation of what you want to say. Even if what you have to say is small and seemingly insignificant, if you give it a voice, it will feel important. And more importantly, it's going to feel authentic, which is what we all want. Being authentic is the ultimate measure of success. Nobody wants a second rate of somebody else. They want you to be you. You need to rely on yourself and how you do things. If you believe in yourself, if you believe that you come first and your story is important and matters, it will show, I promise. Sometimes I ask myself, if I had to give up everything, would I still be a photographer? Ask yourself that. Is it a burning desire? Is it the primary thing in your life? Because it's definitely not about finding happiness. We don't create images to make us happy. Our core motivation is about producing work. Finding happiness is too simplistic. It's about your commitment to want to do this and to say something, to do something that's important. And it's a continuous searching, it's a deep searching. You're really only as good as your last photograph, so you have to keep on creating. And since it's a struggle to speak and to take a photograph, it's constantly going to be for the rest of the time. When you get to the point where you can speak about anything, it is a euphoric of creation. It gives us a sense to exist. And it gives people a way to share how we exist at the same time. It's a powerful way of speaking. It's pretty addicting. This next series of images is from a film that I made. I decided to return to Spain to make a film. I lived there a few times, the first time when I was 16, and as with anything, as with any love, the first time is the deepest cut. I was 16 and I left everything I knew in America to go learn the language in a whole new culture. It was a shock to the system, both mentally, emotionally, and physically. Globalization had already started, of course, but back then there was still this cultural innocence that still existed. There was still so much that I couldn't have had access to in America. I fell in love with the essence of the representation of flamenco and the melodrama that it brings. It was a year where I went from being a girl to being a woman, and it was pretty intense. In keeping with the question of what do you want, I wanted to show what the experience was like. As much as I love photography and will always be a photographer, I wanted to go deeper. How can I show without telling? So I decided to make a short film, and like anything else in another country and in another language, it was a major challenge. This film isn't perfect. It was the second one I'd ever made. I had zero budget and not that much help. I found this actress in England who had been wanting to work with me, and we both met in Spain, in Madrid. I told her about my experiences of living there, and I brought her into my awareness of what I had gone through and what kind of I wanted to relay in the film. I wanted to connect with her, to really share with her kind of who I was so that she could channel it into her acting in her film. I told her about the concept of duende, which is the title of the film. Duende is, as Federica Garcia Lorca calls it, black sounds. And it has 4 components. It's irrationality, earthiness, heightened awareness of death, and a dash of the diabolical. I thought that was a perfect summary for a teenage girl. So let me just show the film, and then we can keep going.
Te espero, mi cómplice de soledad. Porque nuestro poder reside en la fuerza de voluntad.
Te lo digo por tu viento, rey Marta Caldero.
¿Qué pretendes no saber, Isabel? La luz de los sonidos negros iluminan tu alma. ¿Qué pretendes no saber, Isabel?
Te lo digo por tu viento, rey Marta Caldero.
Okay, sweet. So that was an interesting experience for me. I don't know if you guys noticed the ketchup part, but that was because when I moved to Spain, I hated the food so much I put ketchup on everything. I had to get that in there. I love Spanish food now. You may not like the film or you may not get it, but I'm sure it must have evoked something. And I guess all I'm trying to say is, you know, had I stayed within my boundaries of not knowing how to do everything or not understanding or not having a big team, I would have never created it. But I think it's really all about getting it out there and really making yourself connect with what you want and then do it. As I said, it's about doing, not just introspective reflection. And then secondly, I was hoping to have my latest film finished for you guys, but since I am a work in progress, so is my film. I have finished, this past year I shot a short film that's divided into 3 parts. It's definitely an artistic film. It's about mood and texture. And it's not quite done yet, but it resonates with echoes of this connection that I've been talking about. I wanted to touch upon in the film how we've become a society that's at the same time very overconnected and disconnected, at the same time. We are oversaturated with entertainment and noise, yet many of us are disconnected from the roots we came from. I'll let you watch the first act because I did finish that, and hopefully you'll be interested enough to see the rest as soon as it's finished. So let me just show you this. It's just a minute long. part 1. So parts 2 and 3 are almost done. You'll see them soon. So I guess in summary, I'd like to say that a good image or film transcends time, and it takes you both into the image and then out into the larger context of what's going on or what could be going on. There's so much possibility within a moment. And there's so much to discover if we pause and if we choose to unpack a scene and take it to the next level. It's about changing perspective, which I promise will impact your life physically and mentally. It's about using the fear as a catalyst to help propel you into the next compelling story. It's about figuring out your weaknesses are and actually turning them into your strengths. It's about practicing and shooting all the time to find your voice. And once you find your voice, you will have a clearer vision. And the more you believe in it, the more others will as well. You still have to do the work. In no means does having a vision or style mean you're done working. But once you have found your voice and have found a way to translate it into a visual medium, you will find freedom and a confidence in a way that will lead the way. Because I promise you, you're enough. Thank you very much. If you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to answer. Jose?